Can do vid. Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about various claims that are doing the rounds, and it's all part of the wider propaganda to support mass migration into Australia and mass migration generally around the Western world. But the claim is that the hysterical prices of whether it be buying a house or paying rent or whatever, but the hysterical prices around putting a roof over your head in Australia, that has nothing to do with mass migration. What do you say? It's mass migration has got something to do with that? You fucking Nazi? Is that what you are? So this is, let's just have a little. Even people that I would consider, reasonably right of centre, are starting to include propaganda that no, there's plenty of houses. No, that's not a problem. Hey, everything's okay. And they put forward various theories, such as everybody wants a waterfront mansion these days, and that's the approximate cause of the price increases. Now let's just have a look at this. There's a couple of examples I'll use of people selling houses, and to give you an idea of how I would argue how rigged the market is, but also how. Well, it's not a marketplace. It's a marketplace is where net supply and demand in the area determine the prices. They once did in Australia, by the way. But now with international capital moving in and money moving out of productive pursuits such as factories and that sort of thing, it's looking for other areas to make money. And when you look at lower interest rates historically, they have been, again, money tries to move into other assets such as real estate, shares on the stock market and so on. But just having a look at, there's a friend of ours was selling a house, ballpark $3 million type range, and it was put on the market, and they had quite a busy sort of time, with traveling, and so they asked us, could we sort of help out? And so we were dealing with the, I was blowing leaves and dealing with the real estates and being able to see the sort of people coming in. And hardly any of them were white local people. Pretty much everyone that came was either Indian or Chinese, and barely spoke, was clearly fresh off the boat or fresh off the plane. And they had vast sums of money to throw around. Now, these were either the agents for or the actual sort of aristocrats themselves, the Brahmins from India, Communist Party goons from China, and so on. There's only one, as far as I remember, there was only one white people who came to view the property with any sort of interest, at least. And the only reason they had the money is the guy's mother had recently died and had left them the multi-million-dollar house. That was the only reason they were in that. Otherwise, they couldn't. So really, no local people could afford to buy this house, and that's hardly surprising given the amount of people in there'd be less than 1% of the population make enough money to be able to service a mortgage that would come from a $3 million house, unless you're putting in a massive deposit of a couple of $1 million. Even a mortgage of $1 million, there's only a small number of people who could service a mortgage like that. And if they had expenses like children or school fees at good quality schools, that sort of thing, even they couldn't do it. So there's a tiny subset of the local population based on their income. It doesn't, it's different if they won the lottery or something, but only a tiny subset of people in Australia could afford that. So the reality is, and it's a clear and stark reality, is that the majority, if not nearly all the people that could afford it, come from offshore. They come from overseas. They come from wealthy families overseas, or wealthy circumstances overseas, or corrupt money they want to launder, drug money as well. It doesn't matter, but it's not local people working their 9-to-5 job. There's just such a small number of people who could afford to buy a house like that now, or buy a house in that price range. And the same goes for paying rent. People on the average wage with children, or anywhere near the average wage with children, can only afford entry level rent. Now, it's also the case when you look at now, the closer you get towards the Sydney CBD, the greater the rent increases. So say a 2-bedroom apartment, 100 miles out of downtown Sydney would and I'll use just simply round numbers here, would cost $100 a week rent, for example. Then it'll cost $300 if you're quite close to the CBD for that same size, even a smaller apartment. Again, the further you get out, but then there's a point where the prices don't drop anymore, which also means that there's no market in act. So if I want to go 500 miles out of Sydney, I'm paying about the same rent, give or take, that I would spend if I was 100 miles from Sydney. Now, if I go about 150 miles out of Sydney, I can buy a house for, again, roughly the same amount as I was 150 miles, roughly the same amount as I would pay if I was 500 miles. So that there's only a certain amount of price reduction that happens, and then you've got basically a floor price underneath all the real estate in this part of Australia, at least, and the real estate just doesn't fall below that unless you've got some place that's gone completely to rack and ruin in the middle of nowhere. You can get that cheaper, but even then, but not by much. So this indicates or shows quite clearly there is no market in operation, supply and demand. The local price of real estate, whether it be rent or buying, should and must reflect in reality the local purchasing power of the local citizenry. And none of the real estate or rent reflects that at all in any way, shape, or form. So now, whether you call that mass migration, that's the cause of this, as in people pouring in by the 500,000 a year, whether you say that that's down to that, or it's due to offshore buying by rich, into people with, international real estate buyers, if you like, or even the BlackRocks, or it doesn't matter. But there's clearly money coming from outside the Australian society, and that's what's very much part of what's jacking up the prices. But there's more to it than that, and you're more at the sort of lower level, like say in the just over the $1 million price bracket, which is in Sydney now, which is almost entry level, for goodness sakes. This is some people that we know are selling their house, and they're not poor. This guy's inherited a few houses within the space of a few years, so he's gone from being worth next to nothing to suddenly being worth $5 or $6 million just through inheritance. But nonetheless, he's selling his house, and now he doesn't need the money necessarily. Whether if he's got it for 1.1 million, and if someone offers $1 million even, it's not like he needs the money. That money is vital to him, and he's sort of in the retirement type age bracket. So, and again, he's inherited lots, so he can quite happily and quite easily accept an offer that's somewhere near what he wants. He just wants to sell it and get on with things. But so I was talking to him. Well, I've been talking to him almost every day, recently. Well, certainly since he's put the place up for sale, and he's talking about how the real estate agent handles it. So they've had quite a few viewings, in the first couple of weeks. Quite a few people have been putting offers in, which are close to. So he wants 1.1 million. Someone put in an offer of like $1,070,000. So it's only 30,000 shy of his asking price. And you'd think that he'd snap it up, and he was inclined to, but the real estate is insisting, and even brings in supposed economic experts to talk to him and browbeat him into going on with the real estate. No, don't accept an offer. Do not accept an offer. You can get top dollar, and what we want is a situation where we get a few parties that are keen to buy, and we get them then competing against each other and outbidding each other. And we want to get an outbidding type situation. So it's not an auction. So they're not having, but they want to create the conditions and circumstances of an auction, and they're browbeating this property owner to follow a script that is in effect tantamount to an auction. And now, he wants to accept the offer, but they insist no. He said, look, I really do want to. And then the real estate brings, oh, look, we've got this expert economist. He's a real estate economist and he's the biggest genius in the whole universe ever. You know, I'm going to get him to come out and do it. So they actually bring a guy out to talk to him and say, no, you don't accept it. Oh, no, look, you'll get more. You know, keep it on the market for the next 100 years if you have to, but hold out for the top price. And again, let's create the conditions of people bidding against each other to increase the price even further. You know, you may get better than 1.1 million if you get enough people trying to outbid each other. Now that's meant to be how an auction works. You know, everyone arrives at the auction and the people bid in front of each other. But this is where, again, they're through, so I would argue, subterfuge. They're trying to create that auction type atmosphere where people again outbid each other or try to outbid each other. But they're most emphatic on it. Then after a couple of days goes by, the guy, nah, I really do want to sell. So he calls up the real estate agent, says, look, I think I'd like to take that offer that Billy Bob made, and no, don't. Again, the real estate comes out again. They bring out the expert. So they're putting a lot of effort. The real estate, this is putting a lot of effort into stopping this guy from accepting the offer. But why? You know, it's a market transaction. Someone interested in buying has offered this. You know, the seller's happy with it. So the real estate is interposing themselves here to aggressively try and stop and talk the guy out of it, of accepting the offer. Now, what's in it for the real estate? You know, if you look at the percentage commission the real estate's operating on, this is just, the amount of extra money they'd make from this is nickels and dimes in the overall scheme of things. So why would they put this much effort into it? Those supposed experts don't come for free. So someone's paying them to do this, to actually come out and physically talk to the owner to say, don't sell. And, in another week or two, this place will be worth $100 million. They're really, really sort of ginning it up and saying things that I would write off as absurd and crazy, by the way. But there's this guy, the guy selling it you wouldn't call him, particularly sophisticated. So he said, is that right? Is it 100 million? Oh, wow. And so he's quite, just a few minutes of talking to the supposed expert, and they've got him to change his mind again. But so what's in it for the real estate? Again, it's nickels and dimes for them to the extra commissions they'd get out of it being $50,000 more or $20,000 more or something. So there's another issue here. They're trying to artificially pump up the floor price in the area, or the floor price generally. So I would suggest that's what they're doing. And then this is thus a coordinated campaign of floor price pumping that's across the industry, that involves various industry bodies. I would say the government, again, you have the elected officials in Australia now, they derive 50% or more of their income from real estate speculation. So they're on board with this. The banks are on board. There's actually a coalition of forces that are in play here to artificially pump up real estate prices. They don't want prices to fall, to level off, to decline. They want things pumped up to the max. I would argue that's it. The same applies for rentals. Pretty much anyone that's got an investment property is given the banks and the financial companies and the real estate companies, and they're all involved in this, send out weekly circulars or monthly circulars saying, look, your property that you've got over in so-and-so, the rents have just gone up by $10 a week in that area based on, again, the floor price of the, so you need to, jack your rent up by another $10. So they can create a sort of knock-on snowball effect of this. So this is a lot of where, so this coalition of forces, I think, is where, as well as the overseas buying, that's pivotal, of course. And the various taxation management systems that, again, the banks and the finance companies are very closely allied to, where, so, well, look, why don't you take your house off the market for rental and instead put it up for Airbnb? And then when you look at the tax benefits and the tax breaks you can do on this, you'll actually end up in front. Now, given in the overall, if you look at the amount of people, say, that have got one or two investment properties, they claim they're actually, other than other than appreciation of the asset itself, they're actually not really making much money in the rent. Now that seems to me a very tall order. But the argument appears to be that they're having, if they lose their job or they they don't get as much overtime as that somehow their income falls or declines, that they end up having to sell the property, and because they can't afford to keep it based on just the rental income alone. And this is cited as being, well, this is diabolical. This is terrible. They should be making it. No. If you borrow the majority of the stuff you borrow to buy the investment property is mortgaged, then of course the rental isn't going to cover all of those payments. But nonetheless, when you look at this, I didn't realize that the real estate agents were putting that much effort into talking owners out of accepting an offer. Now, what would happen in an actual market is, a local market, is that overseas buyers wouldn't be permitted to buy, whether they through nominees, because they often buy through nominees. So you'll get illiterate Chinese cleaners who have $10 million property portfolios, and things like that are obvious scams. But in a real marketplace where actual market forces existed, they wouldn't permit that. The government would stop it. No, we're not going to. Houses are for people to live in and to have their families and to bring up their family. That's what houses are for. That's what they're places for people to live in. They're not investment objects for international capital, which of course they've become. So the insane price rise. And to give you just an idea, I mean, here's a house in 1970 that sold for $25,000, and $25,000, by the way, and just recently sold for $4.2 million from 25,000. Now, sure, it's 50 years ago, okay, but in 50 years, it increased. It increases by like thousands of percent. No, I don't buy it. So this is the level of and also rents that were $200 a week 10 years ago are now over $1,000 a week for a property that's unimproved. It's not like they've put extensions on it or put in the latest and greatest. So these are the sort of things that are going on. It's because I would argue that mass migration, of course, is one. You drive past a place this is close to the city that's looking for viewing, and there's 50 people queued up for the inspection of the property, and you'd be lucky to see any white people. And when you get further out from the city, where there's a higher proportion of white people, you still see 20 plus people. This is at the entry level on rentals. You still see 20 plus people queuing up for viewing. Now, when I was a young guy looking at properties for rental properties, that sort of thing, I'd be the only one there. There'd be like one person there, and it was me. That's how much things have changed. And of course, mass migration is a huge part of that. Now, some of the statistics they fiddle around with, they say, well, actually, people that arrived as migrant citizens arrived. That instead they leave out the people arriving on work visas, the people arriving on student visas. They leave all that stuff out to try and pretend, well, there's not many migrants coming in. What's your problem, you damn Nazis? But the reality is that students coming here for 3, 4, 5-year courses, 6-year courses, many of them for dud sort of colleges that are all bullshit anyway, and then they go out to work under several different names. And of course, they need somewhere to live, and these sorts of things are going on as well. So that's a bit of an overview of what's happening in the real estate and why the prices are so high. You've been with Tassos today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.